not only disengaging in negative behaviors, but serving as an example to engage in positive behaviors.
And perhaps importantly, what Dr. Lippin said earlier, that model, that role model, is going to the youth of today who are going to be our future leaders.
Absolutely.
So that's a great connection there, and thank you both for your insights. Let us begin now with Module 2. During this module, Dr. Lippin will explore the development of programs which impact all facets of a worker's life, but as well provides practical examples of what employee empowerment actually looks like. I think that you will find Dr. Lippin's philosophies and studies challenging. Coupled with the discussion of community health assessment models offered by Kathlyn Mead, who advocates an enhanced employer role, the relationship amongst programs developed and measures such as health, productivity, and community contributions becomes more clear. Dr. Lippin further highlights the fact that work should actually be a strong element of the pleasures we seek in life. In the confluence of work, the environment, and our health, this fact becomes essential to today's organizations, who despite radical change continue to manage so much of the lives of their workers. Dr. Lippin.
Thank you. A unique confluence of scientific, social, and economic factors is currently driving a very painful but necessary transition in U.S. medicine, which is characterized by the following three megatrends. 1, a shift from reductionism to holism. 2, a shift from paternalism to empowerment. And 3, a shift from a medical system based on a fear of death to that associated with a love of life. Today, I will explore each of these three megatrends and provide evidence, examples, and implications for each. The first trend is what I call a shift from reductionism to holism. Until very recently, Western medical science had successfully embraced and employed a reductionistic biomedical scientific model where, by further dividing the human body and its constituents into smaller and smaller units using such powerful tools as the electron microscope, single causes were found to be associated with single disease outcomes. This approach was especially successful in the infectious disease area, an example being polio, where major diseases have been conquered by highly specific immunizations or other interventions, such as highly effective antibiotics. No one would doubt the miraculous results of this approach for these types of single-cause disorders. However, this reductionistic model is proving to be far less successful with conquering the so-called chronic diseases of modern man, such as cardiovascular disease, including heart disease and stroke, cancer, arthritic disorders, chronic pulmonary disorders, and neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease or other dementias. Rather, these diseases are clearly multifactorial in their causality and include the influences of genetics, aging, the environment, stress, and behavioral factors such as nutrition and lifestyle. It is highly unlikely that there will be so-called magic bullet single cures for cancer and heart disease, for example, the two diseases that account for the highest level of morbidity and premature mortality among Western societies. But rather, we will learn to slowly chip away at all the factors that contribute to these diseases with increasing emphasis on prevention as well. Also, the realities of curing or preventing these chronic diseases of modern man is driving what I and others refer to as a biopsychosocial or holistic model that is emerging as the predominant medical paradigm. I cannot emphasize enough that this paradigm not only recognizes the miraculous technology of modern biomedicine, but is most successful when it weds or synergizes this technology with major advances in psychosocial sciences. An elaboration of this approach is described in an outline of a healthcare plan that I proposed in 1995 entitled Grow Up America. This plan contained 5 fundamental components as follows. Number 1, stop prolonging death. It's both expensive and dehumanizing at best, greedy and cruel at worst. I recognize that this particular recommendation is extremely complex, especially as it relates to long-held religious and ethical views. Conversely, I believe this country is finally maturing and is beginning to recognize that patients deserve a dignified death over which they have more control. It is well documented that over 30% of Medicare dollars are spent in the last year of life. I would not object to this number if it was prolonging life, but my view is that it is often a prolongation of an undignified death. Thus, the establishment and growth of the hospice and palliative medicine movements in this country are indicators of a growing professional and public acceptance of a more mature approach to death and dying issues. This is contrary to the immature and vain and frankly arrogant approach that death should be the enemy of medicine, which must be conquered at all costs. The second component of my plan is to empower U.S. citizens to assume increased individual responsibility for health and convince medical consumers that it is in their best interests not to assume the role of helpless, dependent, victim patients. We'll get back to this concept later in this presentation. The third component of my plan is to face the well-documented reality that a very large percentage of illnesses, injuries, and hospitalizations are entirely preventable. Subsequently, the elimination of tobacco, alcohol, drugs, and medication abuse alone could immediately reduce medical costs by a factor of at least 50%. Echoing the figure published by the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC, which estimates that about 1/2 of all premature mortalities are directly related to individually chosen health behaviors. Also, it is estimated that about 2 out of 3 healthcare claims are lifestyle related, and out of those claims, 2 out of 3 are modifiable. The fourth component of my plan is to educate and incent trained physicians to maintain the health of patients and populations. Thus, medical education needs a massive overhaul since the publication of the so-called Flexner Report in the early part of this century. Furthermore, health maintenance organizations, or HMOs, and managed care organizations have to make good on their namesakes by truly focusing on health maintenance strategies and by emphasizing the management of quality care, not just cost. The fifth and final component of my plan is to recognize that early childhood preventive medical education can profoundly affect lifelong health behaviors. Thus, the current emphasis on children's health is right on target and provides an opportunity to intervene during what neuroscience is telling us are limited biological windows of opportunity in infancy and early childhood. This truly would be preventive medicine at its finest and most efficient. The second published example where I promoted a biopsychosocial model in healthcare is a paper that I had published in Alternative Therapies in Health and Medicine, edited by Larry Dossey, entitled Alternative Medicine in the Workplace. My own view, however, is that the now well-documented boom in so-called alternative medicine, which undoubtedly has been valuable, is just a warm-up for the real revolution in medicine, which is indeed a neuroscience-driven biopsychosocial model of healthcare. What the alternative medicine movement does clearly demonstrate, however, is the ultimate influence of consumers in obtaining what they want, which is clearly not a rejection of biomedical technology, but is what I call biomedicine plus. So we have witnessed in 1999, for example, comprehensive cancer centers incorporating the best of modern high-tech medicine to fight this disease in the form of chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery, the three big guns of modern Western biomedicine, along with a boom in supporting alternative interventions, nutritional approaches, psychological, and support systems. Needless to say, in the article, I provided some practical examples of the current application of alternative medicine interventions specifically geared to workplace populations. They include the use of stress reduction and stress management techniques, such as relaxation and meditation, techniques where I believe I have made a unique contribution, known as stress-releasing techniques, which include the beneficial effects of laughter, weeping, hitting or kicking exercises, responsible sexual expression, writing, and expression in the creative arts. In the article, I also refer to the growing use of body therapies, such as the adoption of many Fortune 500 companies of an on-site massage program, as well as some creative nutritional interventions, such as influencing company cafeteria offerings, and environmental interventions, such as modifying light, sound, and odor environments. I contend that for many reasons, the workplace is a logical location or venue to utilize creative and alternative interventions for many reasons, not the least of which is the pragmatism of corporate leaders to adopt what works. This is the basis of the new emphasis in all of medicine on accountability, efficacy, or outcomes-based measurements. I'd like now to explore with you the second megatrend that I believe is driving modern medicine, namely the shift from paternalism to empowerment. This is an extremely important and difficult issue because it gets directly to the core of the long-established traditional doctor-patient relationship. Two fundamental issues are driving this megatrend, namely modern education and the Internet revolution. Thus, as patients have become more educated, they have developed an increased capacity and desire to understand and participate in their own medical decision-making and their own case management. Our less educated grandparents and parents were generally intimidated by the body of technical medical knowledge. This fear or lack of knowledge conferred upon doctors not only a high degree of respect and status, but probably an inappropriate amount of authority. These generations generally did not challenge physicians' advice, fearing that any challenge would represent a threat to this authoritarian, almost deified figures, the so-called M-deities. However, as larger numbers of individuals became educated and enlightened, along with a growing emphasis on consumerism in medicine, as well as the feminist movement, this relationship began to change. No one, however, could have predicted the dramatic impact of another contemporary revolution, the Internet revolution, on the shift from paternalism to empowerment. patients are now accessing medical information with unprecedented ease and at rapidly increasing numbers, from high-tech esoteria on a specific disorder or disease to how to find, engage, and sustain online social support. In 1996, 7.8 million Americans accessed electronic health information. In 1998, 22 million. And in the year 2000, it is estimated that this will rise to 33.5 million. Furthermore, health website usage is beginning to migrate from a publishing role to a clinical health management role. It is possible, if not likely, that an intelligent patient literally can learn more about a particular disease within the domain of his or her primary care physician. Thus, physicians are being pressed to assume other roles and provide other services, such as psychosocial support, coordination of multi-specialty medical input, and teaching or coaching roles. Another factor that has contributed to a decline of paternalism in medicine, and to which I have already alluded, is the modern feminist movement. Women are increasingly making up a larger percentage of the U.S. physician population, with over 1/2 of current U.S. medical graduates being women. This is changing a previously male-dominated profession where women are demanding and accepting an increasing role in medical decision-making, especially as it relates to diseases and conditions unique to females. This overall shift from paternalism to empowerment, however, is a two-sided coin. As empowerment grows in all patients, so does individual responsibility. Perhaps as we as a nation have done with welfare reform, it is time to apply the cherished and correct American principle of individual responsibility to health care in this nation. A growing number of U.S. citizens are becoming increasingly intolerant of economically subsidizing those who willfully choose to abuse their bodies, thus jeopardizing their own health and increasing both their own and others' health insurance premium rates. Thus, educated, enlightened, and empowered patient citizens, properly incented, need to engage in responsible health-related behaviors. We need to give patients across this country, and by example, the rest of the world, the greatest gift of all, the gift of themselves. Finally, let me talk about a third megatrend where I believe I have made a special contribution. And that is a shift from a medical system based on a fear of death to one associated with a love of life, or what I call the paradigm of medical optimism. While I have written extensively on this so-called paradigm of medical optimism, a term I first utilized in 1991, at its essence, this paradigm is essentially one which is based on a love of life, or self-determination and responsibility. This is in contradistinction to our current predominant medical paradigm of pathology and paternalism, which is based on a fear of death and dependency and victimhood. Biologist E.O. Wilson has used the term biophilia, or love of life, and says that this concept may be the most important yet under-recognized legacy that should be passed on to future generations. Also, in recent years, we have learned a great deal about the biology of optimism, hope, and pleasure. I have developed a particular interest in the links between pleasure and health. Let me pay professional homage to a true pioneer in this field, Dr. David Sobel, who gained international notoriety when he published in 1989, along with his co-author, Robert Ornstein, a book entitled Healthy Pleasures, which was a landmark popular publication in this field. Learning from Dr. Sobel and others, I decided to call my approach to this field responsible pleasures, and made the bold assertion in a speech I delivered to the Society of Prospective Medicine in 1996 that engaging in responsible pleasures was probably the single most underestimated source of health in our times. Thus, despite the fact that over 200 years ago, the United States founding fathers stated in our U.S. Declaration of Independence that among inalienable rights endowed by our Creator was the pursuit of happiness, it seemed to me that most Americans had done poorly in achieving this right. This, in part, was due to the strong influences of the excesses of the Puritan work ethic, which one might argue has contributed much to the short-term economic successes of our nation, but at what price? Health and long-term economic and social well-being. Other factors included increasing time regulation and the influences of some excesses of orthodox religious influences in alienating ourselves from the pleasures of our bodies. Simply put, pleasure became a sin in the U.S. culture. Recently, however, there has been increasing societal acceptance that pleasure is indeed not a sin. The view that man is inherently evil is yielding to the more optimistic view of man being essentially good. Furthermore, it is increasingly felt that with proper emotional health, he or she can be entrusted, even encouraged, to engage in responsible pleasures that do not harm others or society. Thus, the role of physicians as finger waggers to be feared, admonishing patients not to succumb to bestial instincts, is yielding to a new, more enlightened role for physicians, to provide permission and to motivate and encourage individuals to put pleasure into their lives without guilt, to fully embrace the beauty and bounties of human life on this incredibly abundant and beautiful planet. This year, the Futurist magazine published an article of mine entitled Responsible Pleasures, a Doctor's Prescription for What Ails You. In the article, I explored 4 major areas of pleasure in human existence where there is increasing scientific data on positive health outcomes. They include laughter, engaging in the arts, responsible sexuality, and work satisfaction. Let me deal with each of these briefly. Laughter, or what some call the mirth response, was popularized in the 1970s by a non-physician, the late journalist Norman Cousins, author of Anatomy of an Illness. The book described his experience utilizing laughter as an analgesic for his particular arthritic condition known as ankylosing spondylitis. Thanks to Norman Cousins and a few serious researchers in this field, including Stanford University's psychiatrist William Fry, we now have studies that verify the physiological value of laughter, including its positive impact on blood pressure, neuroendocrine responses, and respiratory effects. Other studies have looked at stress hormone changes during mirthful laughter and the possibility of a positive relationship between humor appreciation and longevity. I believe that doctors can teach patients simple techniques to stimulate laughter, which some refer to as internal jogging, including transforming a smile or a giggle into a full-blown, full-bodied mirth response. The second responsible pleasure that I would like to speak of is the impact of the arts on health outcomes. This includes both passive and active participation. The arts therapy movement has been in existence since World War II, applying creative arts therapies such as music therapy, art therapy, dance therapy, poetry therapy, drama therapy, and others in mostly psychiatric settings. Creative arts therapists in recent years have been moving their techniques into other, if not all, medical specialties, including, most notably, pediatrics, geriatrics, oncology, and palliative medicine and hospice. In 1985, I coined the term arts medicine, and a group of international leaders later defined the term as the study of the relationships between human health and the arts. We are learning that aesthetic stimuli such as sound, melody, rhythm, light, color, form, dance, and words themselves indeed have an impact on human physiology. The most mature of these sciences is music medicine, where, for example, for more than 22 years of research under the International Society for Music and Medicine, studies of over 80,000 surgical patients in Germany have unequivocally demonstrated music's capacity to reduce anxiety and pain in preoperative, trans-surgical or during surgery, and post-operative states. Perhaps the most recent contemporary example of the impact of the arts on health was the groundbreaking work from the University of California, Irvine, published in the prestigious British journal Nature, which demonstrated improvements on the impact of spatial reasoning and other central nervous system tasks among college students after listening to music specifically composed by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. This research, which was extended to infants and toddlers, ultimately became known and actually trademarked as the Mozart effect, and has now become popularized and has spawned a veritable industry with all the marketing and media fanfare of a newly introduced pharmaceutical. Furthermore, it has led to at least 2 states in the United States, namely Georgia and Florida, to enact legislation incorporating daily exposure of newborn infants and toddlers to music in daycare centers. The third responsible pleasure that I would like to discuss is sexuality, especially the experience of orgasm, undoubtedly one of the most pleasurable experiences in human existence. This is not surprising from an evolutionary perspective, given that the fundamental biological purpose for sex is to perpetuate the species. There is also evidence that sex is beneficial to our general health. A study published in a prestigious British medical journal in 1997 found that men who had sex twice a week or more had a 50% lower mortality rate than men who had sex less than once a month. Among women, for example, it has been found that those who have at least weekly sexual behavior have estrogen levels about twice as high as their less sexually active contemporaries. Perimenopausal women of an average age of 49 with weekly sexual behaviors were found to have fewer hot flashes and tended to age more slowly. Studies of arthritis and migraine headache sufferers have also demonstrated hours of pain relief after the relaxation and release associated with sexual activity and orgasm. Within the bounds of responsible behavior, including an emphasis on loving, monogamous relationships, if possible, I believe that many more physicians should be counseling and encouraging their patients to engage in more frequent, responsible sexual behaviors. I am convinced of its health-giving properties. Finally, and probably one of the most important responsible pleasures, is work.